The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Karen from the HOA lunged across the courtroom, screaming fraud as deputies handed her neighbor's eviction papers. You're right. I'm no criminal. Just a rancher who turned their legal games against them. How does a man lose 15,000 acres to an HOA he never joined? Simple. They forged the rules. So I rewrote them. By sundown, every McMansion in their precious suburb would learn what happens when you steal a rancher's legacy. Jim from the post office stared at the envelope like it held a rattlesnake. Bad news, son. The HOA's foreclosure notice inside didn't just claim my land, they'd already sold it. To themselves. The sun was barely over the horizon, spilling molten gold across the dry hills of my family's 150-acre ranch. I was checking water lines by the southern pasture when old Jim pulled up in his dusty blue truck, waving that envelope like it might bite him. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over, boots kicking up the soft dirt. Just another tax notice, I figured, or some political junk mail about the upcoming town elections I never bothered voting in. I wasn't much for politics, never had been. Out here, the land was my only concern, and the votes that mattered were the ones cast by rain, cattle births, and the stubborn seasons. Jim watched me longer than he should have, shifting from foot to foot like he had something he wanted to say, but didn't dare. Then he tipped his hat and drove off without another word. I opened the letter right there under the beating sun. At first, I didn't understand what I was reading, legal jargon, foreclosure notices, mention of unpaid maintenance fees, and a court-ordered auction. The unpaid fees they cited? $12.63, the exact cost of the barbed wire Karen fined me for in '09. She'd waited a decade to pick my bones clean. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to kick its way out. According to this official-looking document, my ranch, my inheritance, my home, my entire world had been seized and sold by the Willow Bend Homeowners Association, sold off to developers for pennies on the dollar. I staggered back like I'd been hit, the sun suddenly too bright, too hot, and the ground unsteady under my boots. This had to be a mistake. Some clerical error. I was never part of any HOA. Our ranch predated Willow Bend by nearly 100 years. My great-granddaddy staked his claim here back when the only rules were ones you could enforce with a Winchester and stubborn will. What if I just ignored this? Would the county jail accept HOA dues? Furious, but trying to keep my head, I left the cattle to finish watering themselves and drove straight to town, tires spitting gravel as I tore down the old county road. At the town records office, I slammed the letter down in front of the clerk, a twitchy little man named Daniel, who adjusted his glasses and gave me a nervous smile. There's got to be some mistake, I growled, barely keeping my temper in check. Daniel shuffled through his computer records, fingers clattering on the keyboard. After a long, uncomfortable silence, he clicked his tongue and turned the monitor toward me. There it was, plain as day. My ranch listed under a special annexation filed 6 months ago by Willow Bend HOA. My property was now, according to them, officially part of their community improvement district. That was how they justified the fees I never got notices about because, surprise, they had been sent to an address I didn't even recognize, not my home. And when I didn't pay the made-up fees, they slapped a lien on my land, foreclosed without so much as a knock on my door, and sold it at an HOA special auction attended almost exclusively by their own board members and cronies. My fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just bureaucratic incompetence. This was coordinated theft, pure and simple. Give me every document you have, I demanded, my voice dangerously low. My hands were shaking as Daniel printed them, page after page. A sick feeling crawled up my spine as the truth got worse. The signatures on the annexation petition? Forged. The county commissioner who signed off on the annexation? Just so happened to be Karen Mitchell's brother-in-law. Karen Mitchell, the self-proclaimed queen of Willow Bend HOA. The woman who once tried to fine me for having non-standard fencing when she caught a glimpse of my split-rail borders from the highway. It didn't take a detective to piece together the scheme. The HOA, led by Karen and her little cabal of mini tyrants, had been eyeing my land for years. They hated that my ranch sat right on the edge of their pristine, soulless development like a stubborn middle finger to their uniform beige suburban dreams. They wanted expansion. They wanted luxury golf courses, boutique hotels, exclusive communities with fancy gates and amenities like synthetic lakes and private trails. But first, they needed my land. And because I wouldn't sell, they decided to steal it instead. How many people would take a stand if they lost everything overnight? Would you just walk away? I sat there in the records office, breathing heavy through my nose, reading the list of buyers, and feeling my rage boil over into something deeper, colder, more dangerous. Karen Mitchell had bought 3 parcels herself, right up against the main creek that fed my southern pastures. Her vice president, Todd Granger, snatched up the northern hills where the best views stretched all the way to the mountains. Even the HOA secretary managed to scoop up a piece where my grandfather's old cattle pens still rusted in the sun. Karen's HOA-approved mansion violated 7 of her own bylaws, starting with the illegal pool where her husband's Porsche would soon float, keys in my pocket. They hadn't just stolen from me. They carved up my family's legacy like it was a carcass on a butcher block, laughing and congratulating themselves on a deal well done. I drove home that night on autopilot, the landscape blurred by the fury burning in my chest. The cattle were still milling by the water troughs, unaware that on paper they didn't belong to me anymore. The old ranch house stood stoic against the sunset, windows glowing gold, the porch swing creaking in the evening breeze like a tired old soldier refusing to surrender. I sat on the tailgate of my truck, the foreclosure letter crushed in my fist, and stared at the land that had raised me, that had buried my forebears, that held every memory worth a damn in my life. I could feel the bones of my great-grandfather rolling in their grave. This wasn't just a legal fight. This was personal. This was war. And if Karen and her friends thought they'd gotten away with stealing from me, they had another thing coming. I was born on this land. I knew every creek bed, mesquite tree, every stubborn rock under the soil. They were trespassers here, squatters in a kingdom they didn't understand. They thought a few pieces of paper could defeat a century of blood, sweat, and stubbornness. They thought wrong. I took a deep breath, the night air cool in my lungs, and made myself a promise right then and there under the stars. I was going to take it all back, every acre, every inch. And when I was done, Karen Mitchell was going to wish she had never heard my name. Granddad Loophole could reverse every sale, but first, I had to make the HOA evict themselves. I didn't waste a single minute after that night. By sunrise, I was already on the phone calling in the cavalry. I might not have been much for politics, but I damn sure knew how to hire a good legal team. Old Mr. Harlan had been my family's lawyer for decades, the same one who helped settle my grandfather's estate. And I knew he wasn't afraid of a dirty fight. When I called him, he didn't even hesitate. "Sounds like we've got ourselves a mess, son," he said in that gravelly voice of his. But the thing about messes is they're usually made by folks too stupid to cover their tracks. By noon, I was sitting across from him in his office, flipping through dusty file boxes and yellowed deeds older than the town itself. We started by pulling every public record the HO had filed regarding their so-called annexation. It was even worse than I thought. The signatures on their petition were obvious forgeries, copied so poorly you could see the identical loops and swirls from one fake name to the next. Their public notices of the annexation vote were printed in some backwoods classified section of a county newsletter nobody even subscribed to anymore. Their legal descriptions of the property boundaries were laughable, citing old survey plats from when the land was still cattle trails and wagon ruts, ignoring every modern update. It was sloppy, sloppier than I dared hope. But the real gold came 2 weeks later after Harlan and his partner Jenny dug deeper into the county archives. I was out riding fences when my phone buzzed. When I answered, Jenny was practically vibrating through the line. "You better sit down for this," she said, her voice high and breathless. We found something in the 1910 land covenant records. Something big. I raced back to town, heart pounding in my chest like a war drum, and stormed into the office, still covered in dust and sweat. Harlan didn't even glance up from the thick leather-bound ledger he had open on his desk. He just tapped one gnarled finger against a page so old the ink looked like it was about to evaporate. "Read that," he said. I leaned over and squinted at the faded script, and as the words clicked into place, my world tilted sideways. Their deeds were castles built on quicksand. My lawyers? A flash flood. Back when my great-granddaddy first laid claim to this land, he'd done something damn near unheard of for a roughneck rancher. He'd filed a covenant. A private land use agreement that declared certain parcels of the ranch could never be sold separately unless expressly authorized by direct descendants. Not only that, but he'd attached a reversionary clause, a sneaky little piece of legal trickery that stated if the land was ever subdivided without consent, the ownership would automatically revert back to the original family line, meaning mine. I sank into the chair opposite Harlan, feeling like I'd been gut punched by hope. "You're telling me?" I started, voice cracking. Harlan grinned like a man who just spotted a royal flush. "I'm telling you, son, that when those HOA folks built their fancy houses, they didn't just steal your grazing fields. They squatted right on top of land that was never legally theirs to begin with. Their deeds are voidable. Their mortgages are built on sand. As far as the law's concerned, they're tenants on your property." I sat there stunned, heart slamming against my ribs, trying to take it all in. Jenny flipped her laptop around to show me a satellite map of Willow Bend. The neat rows of cookie-cutter houses sprawling out like a cancerous growth against the rugged hills of my ranch. She had color-coded overlays showing which parcels had been subdivided illegally, and it was most of them. About 80% of the houses in the entire neighborhood were standing on stolen ground. They thought they were expanding, Jenny said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Really, they were just building themselves a little prison, brick by brick, and handing you the keys. My fingers gripped the armrest so hard they creaked. My mind was already racing, seeing the possibilities. If we played this right, I wouldn't just get my ranch back. I could take everything. Every house, every lot, every square inch of land those self-righteous HOA board members strutted around on like little kings and queens. Karen Mitchell's house? Mine. Todd Granger's new 3-car garage he loved showing off at every neighborhood barbecue? Mine. The fancy HOA clubhouse with the Olympic-sized swimming pool and fake marble columns? Mine. I could already imagine Karen's face when she realized she wasn't a queen anymore. She was a tenant, and I was her landlord. I brought 2 files to court, one for the judge, one for Karen's panic attack. Harlan leaned back in his chair, watching me with sharp, assessing eyes. "This ain't going to be a fast fight," he warned. "They'll lawyer up. They'll cry foul. They'll play the victim in the local papers. Hell, some of them might try to get nasty. But you've got the high ground legally, morally, every which way. You ready for that?" I looked him dead in the eye, and I didn't even have to think about it. Born ready. We spent the next month quietly building our case. Harlan filed the necessary notices with the court to preserve my reversionary rights, locking down the titles before the HOA could pull any more funny business. Jenny worked nights compiling dossiers on each parcel, cross-referencing mortgage filings, insurance documents, and plat maps to show exactly how deeply the HOA had messed up. The clock ticked louder when I found Todd's secret. His mansion's eastern wall extended 6 feet beyond the property line he thought he owned. We kept it quiet, moving like wolves in the tall grass. If the HOA caught wind of what we were doing too soon, they'd try to cover their tracks, and we needed them fat, dumb, and happy when we struck. I played my part, too. Kept showing up at town events, smiling and waving, even when I wanted to tear Karen's smug little face off her skull. I let them think I was beat. A sad cowboy too dumb and stubborn to know when he was licked. Meanwhile, every handshake, every "oh, you poor thing" comment was another reminder that they didn't know the storm that was coming for them. Late one night, sitting on my porch with a whiskey in hand and the case files spread out around me, I realized just how perfectly my great-granddaddy had set this trap without even knowing it. He didn't trust government. He didn't trust Finks. He didn't trust developers in fancy suits. He trusted the land and his blood. And now, 100 years later, his stubbornness was about to save his great-grandson's legacy. It almost felt like he was sitting there beside me, grinning under that old battered hat, raising a glass to the long game. Would the county jail accept HOA dues? I wondered aloud, smiling into the dark. Time's up, Karen. The land remembers, and so do I. If there's one thing ranching teaches a man, it's patience. You don't rush a sick calf's recovery, and you don't fight a wildfire by charging straight into the flames. You study the land. You wait for the right wind, then you strike. And that's exactly how I plan to take back what the HOA had stolen. No courtroom theatrics, no public brawls, just slow, methodical revenge, so thorough that by the time they realized what was happening, the noose would already be tight around their necks. First thing I did was set up a series of shell companies, each with clean names that sounded just corporate enough to blend in. Sandstone Holdings, Prairie Ventures, Twin Rock Properties. Through a few trusted contacts from Harlan's network, friends of friends, mostly old-timers who hated the HOA types as much as I did, I lined up straw buyers to pose as investors interested in snapping up property in Willow Bend. No one ever connected them to me, not even close. Meanwhile, I kept my cowboy hat low and my smile ready, playing the role of beaten-down rancher who was just trying to figure out his next move. Outwardly, I was invisible. Inside, I was a ghost, haunting every deal, every handshake, every closing contract that peeled another house away from the smug grasp of Karen Mitchell and her board of crooks. It started slow, as all good ambushes do. The first house came up after a young couple defaulted on their mortgage. Rumor had it they struggled with the endless compliance fees and surprise special assessments the HOA kept levying, Karen's favorite tactic to bleed residents dry when she wanted them gone. The place needed work. Peeling paint, overgrown bushes, a cracked driveway. The HOA fined them into oblivion, then sneered when the bank took it. That's when Prairie Ventures stepped in with a cash offer. No inspections, no contingencies, fast closing. The bank practically threw the deed at us. You can't own my home. Karen would soon shriek. Funny, your notary public disagrees. Karen even smiled at the new investors at the HOA meeting, gushing about how great it was that young professionals were finally investing in the community. I watched from a distance, tipping my hat and chuckling into my coffee. She didn't recognize her worst nightmare when it was standing 2 feet from her bake sale table. Over the next year, we picked them off one by one. Another foreclosure here, an older couple downsizing there, a family transferring jobs out of state. Each time, one of my shell companies bought the house. We kept the properties neat, mowed lawns, fixed roofs, painted fences, played the game by their own rigid rules so there'd be no suspicion. Some we rented out to locals who hated the HOA but couldn't afford to move. Some we left empty but immaculate, like ghost houses with fresh-cut grass and new welcome mats. The HOA board, too blinded by their own arrogance, never once questioned why so many buyers seemed happy to pay cash, but never showed up for community events, never volunteered for committees, never ran for board seats. They were too busy patting themselves on the back for revitalizing Willow Bend to notice the ground shifting under their feet. By the 18-month mark, my companies owned nearly a third of Willow Bend outright. Every house we bought shifted the balance of voting power just a little more in my favor. Karen remained oblivious, too caught up in her petty power plays, issuing citations for kids' lemonade stands, banning certain colors of Christmas lights, imposing $500 fines for non-standard porch decorations. Was Karen's perfect community worth throwing people out of their homes? What would that feel like if the tables turned? Meanwhile, I attended every open house disguised as a polite, curious relative of a potential investor. I sipped cheap lemonade from paper cups, nodded sagely at their tour guides, and took mental notes of every crack in their walls, every leak in their HOA armor. I knew their bylaws better than they did. I knew their financial vulnerabilities, the deferred maintenance on the clubhouse roof, the way they'd borrowed from reserve funds to pay for Karen's pet project of synthetic turf at the tennis courts. It was only a matter of time. 2 years in, my companies owned 64% of the homes in Willow Bend. That gave me, or rather the network of buyers quietly connected to me, a supermajority vote, the power to rewrite bylaws, the power to elect new board members, the power to dissolve the HOA entirely if I wanted to. I held the future of Willow Bend in the palm of my calloused hand, and they were still throwing wine and cheese mixers at the clubhouse, bragging about their revitalized community spirit. I even started hearing whispers that Karen was planning a new expansion project, building a private park on land she didn't realize still technically fell under my great-granddaddy's covenant protections. Good. Let them dig their own graves deeper. The day we crossed the 50% ownership threshold, I celebrated the only way a rancher knows how. I saddled up my best horse, rode out to the highest ridge on my land, and watched the sun dip behind the town that had stolen from me. The land stretched out in every direction, silent, patient, eternal. It had seen fools come and go. It would outlast them all. So would I. I sat there until the stars came out, counting them like victories, breathing in the clean, sharp air of a future almost within my grasp. All the while, Karen Mitchell and her HOA board continued their little power games, oblivious to the storm brewing right under their polished shoes. They hosted a spring garden tour showcasing approved landscaping. Half the houses featured belonged to me. They handed out Community Pride Awards, some of them pinned to doors I now owned. They issued violation notices to new owners who quietly shredded them and sent me photos of the confetti. Every time Karen smiled at a new family moving in, thinking she was building her empire, she was really just handing me another brick in the wall that would eventually crush her. It was almost poetic, really. They'd built their entire identity on controlling others, on dictating how lawns should be mowed, and what color blinds you could have, and whether a front door wreath was seasonally appropriate. And now, without realizing it, they were tenants in a kingdom owned by the man they tried to ruin. Some nights, when the ranch work was slow and the stars were out in full force, I'd pour myself a whiskey, pull out the old maps of Willow Bend, and mark another lot acquired. Another tiny flag of freedom planted on stolen ground. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about principle, about legacy, about proving that no matter how many fake committees or rubber stamp bylaws you pile up, real ownership, like character, can't be faked. It's earned acre by stubborn acre in sweat and dust and years of hard living. And when you try to cheat a man out of that, well, you best hope he's merciful. Me, I wasn't feeling particularly merciful. Not anymore. The day I finally made my move, the sky was the color of old gunmetal, thick with the promise of rain, and the air smelled electric, like the land itself knew something was about to break loose. I stood in front of the Willow Bend Community Center, boots planted firm on the concrete, cowboy hat pulled low against the drizzle, clutching a worn leather folder that weighed more than just paper. It held history, blood, and the receipts for every inch of ground they thought they owned. Inside that building, Karen Mitchell and the HOA board sat fat and happy, preparing for yet another closed-door meeting where they would fine some poor retiree for having the wrong shade of beige on their porch swing. Only this time, I wasn't here to be fined. I was here to turn their whole rotten little empire into ash. I walked through the glass doors without hesitation, past the fake receptionist who barely looked up, and straight into the main meeting hall where Karen perched at the head of a polished oak table like a vulture in pearls. You can't just barge in, she snapped, but her voice faltered when she saw the stack of documents in my arms. I set them down with a satisfying thump that echoed off the sterile drywall. Actually, I said, pulling out a copy of the HOA bylaws, flipping straight to the section on special member meetings, according to your own rules. Any member representing more than 50% of the neighborhood may call a meeting at any time with or without board approval. I slid the paperwork across the table toward her, and she paled as she saw the signatures of every LLC, every straw buyer, every new homeowner she'd so graciously welcomed without realizing they were all me. We're in session now, Karen. Better take notes. For the next hour, I laid out my case with the precision of a cattle branding. First, I showed the old 1910 land covenant that made it clear no part of Willowbend was ever lawfully separated from the original ranch without my family's consent. Consent that had never been given. Then I presented the surveys and title records, proving that every single home built in Willowbend sat atop land fraudulently annexed and improperly deeded. Next came the forged signatures, the fake public notices, the crooked commissioner's rubber stamps. I watched the blood drain from Karen's face, watched Todd Granger shift uncomfortably in his chair, watched their secretary's hands tremble as she tried to take notes. They knew. They knew it was over before I even got to the lawsuit. But I didn't stop there. I dropped the hammer. One by one, I called out the board members by name, reading off the specific damages each was being sued for personally: breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, conspiracy to commit title theft, and good old-fashioned property conversion. This wasn't just a civil suit against the HOA itself. I was coming after them individually, their houses, their savings, their trust funds, their kids' college accounts, everything. Karen tried to interrupt, tried to bluster about countersuits and slap violations, but her voice cracked like dry timber under the weight of evidence. And when I pulled out the court injunction already signed by a district judge, barring the HOA from collecting any more dues, enforcing any more fines, or even holding a meeting without court approval, she finally, mercifully shut her damn mouth. The room sat in stunned silence. The only sound, the soft pitter-patter of rain against the windows. Effective immediately, I said, my voice steady, the Willowbend Homeowners Association is under court-ordered suspension pending full legal review. You are no longer authorized to act on behalf of the neighborhood. Any attempt to collect dues, issue fines, or enforce regulations will be considered contempt of court. Karen opened her mouth again, but this time it was Todd who put a hand on her arm and shook his head. He knew. They all knew. The walls were crumbling, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do to stop it. Over the next 6 months, the case wound its way through court like a cattle drive through deep mud, slow but inevitable. My lawyers buried them in discovery demands, subpoenaed every shady contract, every sketchy email, every under-the-table land deal they thought would never see daylight. We found records of special assessments funneled into private bank accounts, fake consulting fees paid to relatives, and enough conflicts of interest to make a crooked congressman blush. Karen tried everything. Sob stories in the local paper, GoFundMe campaigns painting herself as a victim of rural aggression, even half-hearted countersuits claiming harassment. None of it stuck. The evidence was too overwhelming, too damning. And the final nail in the coffin came when the county commissioner, under threat of perjury, confessed in a sworn deposition that the original annexation approvals had been rubber-stamped without proper verification at Karen's insistence. The judge didn't just rule in my favor. He torched them. In a scathing 23-page opinion, he declared the HOA fraudulently constituted, illegally operated, and irreparably compromised, and ordered its immediate dissolution. He vacated every lien they had ever filed, nullified every fine they had ever levied, and canceled every pending foreclosure they had instigated. And he wasn't done. Personal judgments were issued against Karen and each board member, holding them jointly and severally liable for millions in damages, not just to me, but to dozens of other homeowners they had bullied, extorted, and harassed over the years. Their houses were seized, their bank accounts frozen, their country club memberships revoked when the monthly dues mysteriously went unpaid. Watching them fall was better than any whiskey I ever poured. Karen lost her house first. A sprawling faux mansion she'd once bragged about being future-proofed with smart tech, now auctioned off at a sheriff's sale for pennies on the dollar. Todd tried to hide assets by transferring them to his brother. The judge slapped him with contempt charges faster than you could blink. Their secretary, a meek little woman who once fined a family $300 for excessive Halloween decorations, had to move back in with her mother in Tulsa. And me? I took possession of the community center, the clubhouse, the parks, the trails, every piece of land that once belonged to their hollow little kingdom. I didn't just control Willow Bend. Now I owned it, legally and fully, down to the last blade of HOA-approved Kentucky bluegrass. On the day the final orders were recorded, I stood in the middle of the empty community center, the polished floors echoing under my boots, and hum a single brass plaque over the fireplace. Property of Freedom Fields Ranch. No trespassing, no HOAs, no exceptions. It gleamed like justice under the cheap fluorescent lights. I walked back outside into the crisp morning air, tipping my hat to the handful of remaining homeowners who waved at me from their porches. The ones who hadn't bought into Karen's nonsense. The ones who could finally breathe free again. My boots crunched on the gravel as I headed toward my truck. The whole town spread out before me like a conquered frontier. For the first time in too long, bitter years, I smiled without reservation. The land was back in the right hands, and the fools who thought they could steal it had been taught a lesson written in deeds, dust, and a stubbornness they'd never understand. The long game was over. I had won. Once the dust settled and the final gavel came down in court, it was time to finish what I started. Eviction day wasn't some dramatic showdown like you'd see in a movie. It was quiet, methodical, almost boring if you didn't know the story behind it. One by one, the former HOA board members received official notices from my attorney's office informing them that due to their fraudulent titles being nullified and personal judgments levied against them, they no longer legally owned their homes. They were now tenants, and they owed rent to Freedom Fields Holdings, which of course was me. The rent wasn't cheap either. Market rates had climbed, and I made sure every penny squeezed out of those beige, soulless houses went back into restoring the ranch they tried to steal. Watching them shuffle out their front doors, red-faced and humiliated, dragging garbage bags stuffed with their designer clothes was better than any Sunday sermon. Karen Mitchell was the last to go, clinging to her crumbling McMansion like a barnacle on a sinking ship. She held out longer than the others, filing desperate motions, crying to the local news, pleading with anyone who would listen about the injustice being done to her. But the law was ironclad, and a sheriff's eviction notice didn't care about her crocodile tears. When the moving trucks finally rolled up to her manicured driveway, it wasn't antique furniture or priceless heirlooms they loaded. It was desperation and shattered pride, packed into sagging cardboard boxes and cheap plastic bins. Karen's eviction notice fluttered into the dirt beside her number one boss babe mug. I planted my boot on both, grinning. The land always wins. Karen's jewelry, the same pearls she wore like a noose of superiority at every HOA meeting, went first, auctioned off to pay her share of the damages. Next went the Mercedes she once parked diagonally across two spots at the clubhouse just to show she could. Her vacation timeshares, her husband's fishing boat, even the fancy gym equipment gathering dust in their garage, all sold off piece by piece until the Mitchell name, once whispered with such reverence around Willow Bend, became a punchline for anyone who knew the truth. As for the old HOA office, the crown jewel of their petty kingdom, I had plans for it. Big ones. I didn't just want to erase their mark. I wanted to replace it with something better, something lasting. So, one bright Saturday morning under a sky so blue it hurt your eyes to look at, I brought in a bulldozer and leveled the place to the ground. No fanfare, no ceremony, just steel teeth tearing through drywall and broken dreams while a small crowd of neighbors, real neighbors, not the Stepford cult Karen tried to build, cheered and whistled from their porches. In its place, I built a public dog park. Not some fancy members-only patch of AstroTurf, but a real park with trees and open fields and a big wooden sign carved by hand. We named it after my great-granddaddy, the man who started it all, Greer's Run. Every time I see a kid laughing while their mutt chases a ball across that grass, I remember why I fought so damn hard. Because land isn't just dirt. It's memory. It's freedom. It's every calloused hand that ever worked it. Every back bent under the sun. Every stubborn dream too important to let die under a pile of HOA paperwork. The final months passed in a slow, sweet haze of satisfaction. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, the remaining homeowners started fixing their houses the way they wanted, painting bright colors, planting real gardens, raising flagpoles, and building tree houses. It wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a community, a real one. And every inch of it stood because I refused to let them steal what wasn't theirs. I took my time restoring the ranch, too. Repaired the fences, reseeded the pastures, dug new wells where the old ones had run dry. And when the work was done for the day, I'd sit on the porch of the old ranch house, coffee in hand, boots crossed at the ankle, and watch the sun bleed across land that was now officially, legally, indisputably mine. Not just once, but twice over. Mine by blood, mine by battle. Some nights, I'd chuckle to myself, remembering Karen's screech when she realized she'd be writing rent checks to the very man she tried to ruin. Other nights, I just sat quiet, listening to the coyotes howl in the hills, feeling the deep, ancient hum of the land beneath my boots. The land, huh?